The bridal suite at Rosewood Estate smelled like white roses, fresh linen, and expensive perfume, the kind that promised perfection. Everything in the room was curated to make Claire Monroe look like the woman who had finally won at life. The dress draped over her frame like something out of a glossy magazine, tailored and elegant, designed to whisper success with every fold of silk. From the outside, Claire was flawless. A powerful tech CEO, a self-made woman, a poised, confident bride about to marry a charming venture capitalist. Inside, she felt uneasy, tense, and quietly terrified. She stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. The woman looking back was polished, composed, and controlled, but behind her eyes lived a flicker of doubt she could no longer ignore. Across the room, Noah Brooks stood near the window, phone pressed to his ear. His dark suit was neat but modest, his posture calm but alert. He had been making calls nonstop for the last 20 minutes. Every time the call disconnected, his jaw tightened just a little more. Claire watched him through the mirror. Noah had been her executive assistant for 4 years. He knew when she needed coffee before she asked. He knew when a boardroom was about to turn hostile. He knew when she was pretending to be strong. And right now, his silence was ominous. He ended another call and slipped the phone into his pocket. Their eyes met in the reflection. "Well?" Claire asked, her voice light but strained. Noah hesitated. That was never a good sign. "Still nothing," he said quietly. "I've called Ryan's phone, his assistant, even his driver. No one knows where he is." The words landed like a crack in glass. Claire turned away from the mirror and smoothed the front of her dress, a nervous habit she had never quite managed to break. "Maybe he's stuck in traffic," she said, though even she could hear how weak it sounded. Noah shook his head. "The route is clear. I checked." A cold heaviness settled in Claire's chest. Outside the tall windows, guests were already seated in the garden. White chairs lined the lawn in perfect rows. A string quartet played softly. Cameras from 2 media outlets waited near the entrance. 300 people had flown in from all over the country to watch Claire Monroe get married. This wedding wasn't just personal. It was public, symbolic, and strategic. For 20 years, Claire had built her company from nothing. She had survived boardroom wars, hostile takeovers, and ruthless competitors. This wedding, this carefully curated love story, was supposed to be proof that she could have it all. Now the groom was missing. Claire walked to the window and looked down at the scene. Everything was beautiful. Everything was ready. Everything except him. She thought about Ryan Whitaker. Charming, smooth, ambitious. They had met 2 years ago at a charity gala. He knew how to navigate her world of investors and press. He never complained when she worked late. He understood ambition, or so she thought. They had dated for 18 months before he proposed. It had felt logical, safe. 2 successful people building a powerful life together. But standing there in her wedding dress, Claire couldn't remember the last time Ryan had looked at her the way Noah was looking at her now, with concern, loyalty, and quiet devotion. "What do I do?" she whispered. Her voice was small, vulnerable, a voice she almost never used. Noah stepped closer, careful not to touch her. He always respected her space. "You have options," he said gently. "We can delay the ceremony, or cancel it." Claire shook her head immediately. "No. If I cancel, it becomes a scandal. My investors will question my stability. The press will destroy me. They'll say if I can't manage my personal life, I can't run a company." It was a cruel truth she knew too well. The world forgave powerful men for emotional messes. It didn't forgive women. Noah checked his phone again. His face went still. "What?" Claire demanded. He turned the screen toward her. A message from Ryan's assistant. "Mr. Whitaker sends his regrets. He's unable to attend today. He will be in touch." Unable to attend, like a canceled meeting. Claire stared at the words. Her hands went numb. "He didn't even tell me himself," she whispered. "He couldn't even face me." Noah caught her when she swayed. His grip was firm but gentle. "I'm sorry," he said. And she believed him. "They're all waiting," Claire murmured. 300 people, cameras. "I walk out there alone and it's over." Noah watched her carefully. "Then what do you want to do?" Claire looked at him, really looked at him. A reliable, steady, selfless man who had stood beside her through every crisis. A single father who never asked for more than he was given. The only person in the building she trusted not to lie to her. An unthinkable idea formed. "I need you to do something," she said slowly. "Anything. I need you to walk me down that aisle." She swallowed. "And stand beside me, as the groom." Noah's eyes widened. Claire, that's insane. I can't be abandoned in front of everyone, she said, her voice now sharp, commanding, desperate. We do the ceremony. We take the pictures. We get through today. Silence stretched between them. Why me? Noah asked. Because you're the only person here who won't let me fall. Noah closed his eyes for a moment. Then against every instinct he had, he held out his arm. Let's go. And with a shaking but determined grip, Claire Monroe took it. The doors to the garden slowly swung open, and a flood of sunlight poured into the hallway. The soft notes of the string quartet drifted inside, warm and hopeful, completely unaware of the storm about to walk through it. Claire Monroe tightened her grip on Noah Brooks's arm. Her fingers were trembling, even though her posture remained elegant, controlled, and immaculately composed. Years of leading boardrooms had taught her how to hide fear behind a confident smile. But this was different. This was personal. This was terrifying. 300 guests rose to their feet. Camera shutters clicked. And Claire, the woman who had spent her life mastering every possible outcome, stepped forward into a moment she had never imagined. From the outside, everything looked perfect. The bride glided down the aisle beside her groom. White roses lined the path. Soft music floated through the air. It was the kind of scene people saved on their phones and replayed for years. But inside Claire's chest, her heart was racing, fragile, and dangerously exposed. Noah walked beside her with steady, deliberate steps. He didn't look at the guests. He didn't look at the cameras. He kept his eyes forward, like a man walking into a difficult meeting instead of a wedding. His calm was the only thing keeping her from breaking. "You okay?" he whispered without turning his head. "No," she murmured back, "but keep going." They reached the altar. The officiant, a kind, silver-haired woman who had seen hundreds of couples, smiled warmly. Her eyes flickered for half a second when she looked at Noah, but professionalism quickly smoothed it away. Claire and Noah turned to face each other. For the first time since the nightmare began, everything went quiet. The officiant began to speak about love, commitment, and two lives becoming one. Claire barely heard the words. She was too aware of Noah standing so close, of the heat of his hand near hers, of the lie they were about to tell together. "Please join hands," the officiant said. Noah took Claire's hand. His fingers were warm, steady, grounding. It was a simple touch, but it sent an unexpected wave of emotion through her chest. She had shaken his hand in meetings 1,000 times. This was different. This was intimate, vulnerable, and strangely comforting. "Do you, Claire Monroe, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" For a terrifying second, her mind went blank. Then Noah's thumb brushed lightly against the back of her hand, a tiny, reassuring motion. "I do," she said, her voice clear. "And do you, Noah Brooks, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Noah didn't hesitate. He didn't look away. "I do." The words hung between them. They were fake, but they didn't sound fake. The ring bearer stepped forward, holding 2 simple gold bands. Claire's hand shook as she slid one onto Noah's finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had always belonged there. Noah placed the other ring on her hand with careful, deliberate gentleness. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the officiant said. "You may kiss the bride." Claire's breath caught. They hadn't talked about this part. Noah leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. His hand came up to her cheek, light but protective. Their lips met in a brief, respectful kiss, but it sent a jolt through her that felt dangerously real. The crowd erupted in applause. Flashes went off. And just like that, the lie was sealed. Moments later, they were swept into the reception hall, where chandeliers sparkled and champagne flowed. Claire moved through it all like a graceful, exhausted ghost, smiling, shaking hands, posing for photos with the man who wasn't supposed to be her husband. Noah stayed close, his hand resting on her lower back, as if reminding her she wasn't alone. "You're doing amazing," he murmured. "I feel like I'm going to collapse," she whispered. "Then lean on me." And for the first time all day, Claire Monroe did. The reception unfolded like something out of a glossy wedding magazine. Crystal chandeliers, soft music, and guests laughing as if they were witnessing a fairy tale. Claire Monroe stood in the center of it all, moving from table to table with a graceful, practiced smile that hid the chaos inside her chest. Beside her, Noah Brooks played his role with quiet, steady confidence. He held her hand when photographers called for them. He kept his arm lightly around her waist when guests offered congratulations. He spoke politely, warmly, like a man who truly belonged there. And somehow, No one noticed. Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, someone said with a laugh as they clinked champagne glasses. Claire felt a strange jolt at the words. Noah felt it too. She could tell by the way his fingers tightened just slightly against hers. They shared a look, half awkward, half stunned, and then smiled for the cameras again. Claire's best friend Lena pulled her into a hug near the bar. "You look incredible," she whispered. "I've never seen you this happy." Claire swallowed. "Thank you." She didn't know how to explain that the man Lena thought was Ryan wasn't Ryan at all. The first dance was announced. Soft lights dimmed across the ballroom, casting everything in a romantic, dreamlike glow. Noah led Claire onto the dance floor, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers. The music was slow and emotional, something meant for couples who had waited their whole lives for this moment. "I can't believe we're doing this," Claire whispered. Noah gave a faint smile. "You're doing it. I'm just keeping you upright." She almost laughed, but it came out more like a breathless sound. As they swayed together, Claire noticed how gentle and respectful Noah was. He didn't hold her too close. He didn't take advantage of the moment. He just kept her steady. "You're really good at this," she said. "Being invisible?" he asked softly. "Being here." His eyes softened. "I meant what I said earlier. You didn't deserve to go through that alone." The song ended. Applause filled the room. But when Noah stepped away, Claire felt a strange, unexpected emptiness, like she had lost something she hadn't known she needed. Later, while guests were distracted by cake and speeches, Claire's phone buzzed. A message. From Ryan. Her heart dropped. She opened it slowly. "I'm sorry. I wasn't ready to get married. I need time. Please understand." No call, no explanation. Just a cowardly, careless line of text. Claire stared at the screen, her hands shaking. Noah noticed instantly. "What is it?" She handed him the phone without a word. He read it, his jaw tightening. "He waited until now?" "He couldn't even tell me to my face," she whispered. "After everything." The strength she had been clinging to all day finally cracked. Tears filled her eyes. "I thought I did everything right," she said. "I built the career. I made the relationship work. I planned the perfect wedding. And he still walked away like I meant nothing." Noah guided her away from the crowd into a quiet side room. The noise of the party faded behind them. "You didn't make him run," he said firmly. "That's on him." Claire sank into a chair, her breath ragged, broken. "I married you to save face, and the man I actually loved didn't even show up." Noah knelt in front of her. "You deserve better than that." The tears came fast and hard. And for the first time all day, Claire let herself fall apart, right into the arms of the man who had stayed. The laughter and music from the reception felt distant now, like a party happening in another world. Inside the quiet side room, Claire Monroe sat with her hands folded in her lap, her breathing slowly evening out after the storm of tears. Her mascara was smudged, her perfect image cracked, but somehow she felt more honest than she had all day. Noah Brooks stayed close, giving her space but never leaving her alone. He handed her a glass of water, his movements gentle, attentive, and steady. "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For not walking away." Noah shrugged slightly. "You didn't need to be left alone on the worst day of your life." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Claire let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "I married my assistant in a panic, and the man I planned to spend my life with couldn't even call me." Noah's expression darkened. "That's not love. That's avoidance." Outside, fireworks went off over the estate, another expensive detail Ryan had insisted on. The irony made her stomach twist. "I feel so stupid," Claire said softly. "I ignored every red flag. He stopped making time for me. He stopped asking about my day. I told myself it was just how successful people are." "Some people are just good at pretending," Noah said, "until it's time to show up." Claire looked at him. "Your wife, was she like that?" He shook his head. "No. Sarah was honest, even when it hurt." His voice softened when he said her name. "Before she died, she made me promise something." "What?" "That I wouldn't live my life hiding from fear. That I'd always show up for the people who mattered." Claire felt a lump in her throat. "You kept that promise today." Noah met her gaze. "I tried." For the first time, Claire saw him not as her assistant, but as a loyal, brave, deeply human man who had chosen to stand beside her when no one else did. "What happens now?" she asked. Noah took a breath. "Tomorrow we tell people the truth. We get an annulment. We go back to our normal lives." The logical answer. Safe answer. But it made her chest ache. "And us?" she asked quietly. Noah hesitated. This was a moment. A crisis. You were hurt. Emotions get confusing in situations like this. That kiss didn't feel confusing, she said. His eyes flickered. Claire, I know the difference between gratitude and something more, she said. Don't tell me what I'm feeling. He looked torn, protective but afraid. I just don't want you making another choice out of pain. She stood up slowly, meeting his eyes. And I don't want to pretend this didn't mean anything. Space between them felt charged, uncertain. A knock on the door interrupted the moment. One of the coordinators peeked in. The last guests are leaving. Noah exhaled. I should go. My daughter's with a sitter. Claire nodded, suddenly aware of how thin the night felt. Thank you, she said, for being there. Noah slipped off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. You don't have to be strong tonight. Then he walked away. And Claire Monroe, standing alone in a wedding dress that meant nothing, realized the lie had changed everything. The estate grounds were quiet now. The music had faded, the guests were gone, and only the soft trickle of a fountain filled the night air. Claire Monroe sat alone on a stone bench in the garden, wrapped in Noah Brooks' jacket. The fabric still carried his warmth, steady and familiar in a way that made her chest ache. Her wedding dress felt like a costume she was ready to shed, but she hadn't moved yet. Everything about the day still felt surreal, heavy, and painfully real all at once. Footsteps crunched softly on the gravel. Noah returned. I forgot my phone, he said quietly, holding it up. But neither of them pretended that was the only reason he'd come back. They sat together in silence for a moment, watching the moonlight shimmer across the fountain. I should have seen it coming, Claire said at last. Ryan stopped trying. I just didn't want to believe it. Sometimes people are good at hiding who they really are, Noah replied, until it matters. Claire turned to him. Do you ever feel like people leave because of who you are? Noah hesitated. I used to. After Sarah died, I wondered if I'd somehow failed her. But some things aren't about us. They're about them. The truth in his words settled deep. You didn't fail today, he added gently. You were brave enough to keep going. I was desperate, she said. Desperate people still deserve kindness. Claire smiled weakly. You're a good man, Noah Brooks. He shook his head. I'm just someone who knows what it feels like to be abandoned. They looked at each other, the weight of the day still hanging between them, fragile, uncertain, unfinished. What do we do now, she asked. We tell everyone it was a mistake, and he said softly. We fix it on Monday. Her heart tightened. And if it wasn't? Noah didn't answer right away. Then we risk getting hurt. Claire reached for his hand. I already am. For a moment, he let her hold it. Then slowly, gently, he pulled back. You deserve time. Not another rushed decision. I don't want to lose you, she admitted. His eyes softened. You won't, but I have to go home to my daughter. She's my real world. I know. He stood hesitating for a second before leaning down. For what it's worth, I meant every word I said up there. Then he walked away again, leaving Claire in the quiet garden, alone, but no longer completely empty. The sky was beginning to soften with the first hint of dawn when Claire Monroe finally left the garden. The estate stood quiet now, stripped of its music and guests, like a stage after the curtain had fallen. She walked slowly through the empty halls, her heels echoing against marble floors, every step feeling heavy, reflective, and strangely peaceful. In a small side room, she sat down and looked at the wedding rings still on her fingers. They were beautiful, expensive, and completely meaningless. One by one, she slid them off and placed them in the pocket of Noah's jacket. They didn't belong to her story anymore. What stayed with her was something else. Not Ryan's absence, not the humiliation, but the memory of a man who had stood beside her when everything fell apart. Noah Brooks hadn't promised her forever. He hadn't shown up with flowers or grand speeches. He had simply been there, quiet, loyal, unshakable, when she needed someone most. And for the first time in years, Claire realized how rare that kind of love truly was. Back in her hotel suite, she washed the makeup from her face and stared at her reflection. Without the flawless foundation and perfect hair, she looked different, tired, vulnerable, and real. But she also looked like someone who had survived something painful and come out stronger. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ryan. She didn't open it. Some doors once closed didn't deserve to be reopened. Instead, she found herself thinking about Noah, about the way he had held her when she cried, about the steady way he had looked at her, about the promise he made even though he didn't have to. I meant what I said up there. Those words echoed in her mind. The next morning, Claire stood by the window as sunlight spilled across the city. A new day, a blank page. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. She didn't know if Noah would ever be part of her future, but she knew she would never forget the man who stayed when others ran. And that changed everything. So let me ask you, if someone shows up for you in your darkest hour, when you are broken, embarrassed, and at your weakest, isn't that the kind of love that truly matters? Would you choose the one who left or the one who stayed? Sometimes the greatest love stories don't start with fireworks and perfect weddings. They begin in the quiet moments when two hearts recognize each other through pain, honesty, and courage. If this story touched you, if it made you think about the people in your own life who showed up when it counted, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more emotional, human, and unforgettable stories. Because the stories that change us are the ones that feel real.